I sure can. Yes, welcome everybody. This event today of A Protest is Worth 1,000 Pictures, I think is the title that we came up with Michael Englund, who is a former an alum from the Greenlee School. This event is part of our First Amendment Days celebration, which we're in our 19th year of celebrating the 5 freedoms of the First. And I've been making a habit to say what those 5 freedoms are so you can all remember. Those are the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom of petition, assembly, and religion. And we gather each year to invite students and the campus community to not only talk about those 5 freedoms, but also look for ways to actually practice them. So I think today's session is so timely in hearing firsthand about how, the freedom of the press, if you will, really works, and how anybody can exercise that freedom of the press. So my name is Julie Rosa. I can't remember if I said that at the beginning, and I'm the First Amendment specialist. But Sherry today, who is another member of the First Amendment Committee, is going to help moderate the session, and we'll turn it over also to Michael.
Okay. So Mike, will you pull up your screen? So Mike Englund, like Julie said, is a graduate of Greenlee. He graduated in 2017 in advertising. Mike currently lives in Des Moines, works as an assistant editor at Hy-Vee doing video work. In his free time, he does a lot of photography, including music videos, lifestyle portraits, restaurant and bar photography. And last summer, when the BLM protests started in Des Moines, Mike was there. He grabbed his camera, he went down, and today he's going to talk to us about his experiences, about the importance of photojournalism, and just kind of what he saw and experienced last summer.
Yeah, and I think there was 2 types of photographers during the protests. Ones that were out there for like a news company, or were shooting, basically for a news company, documenting it for work. And then I think I fell more into the category of being just involved with the protests, but also being a photographer. Often, like wherever I go, I have my camera in my hand. So that was kind of the way I documented it, which I think was better because it wasn't like underneath the rules and regulations of a business. I didn't have to worry about, getting in trouble and getting my business in trouble. It was more of just like me solely out in the, if you want to call it the wild, wild west, which I think I enjoyed a little bit more than doing it for work. So I have a short presentation. Initially, for some reason, I thought this was going to be like a 20-minute presentation, not an hour long. So it may not be quite as long, but I can try to stretch it out and hopefully leave a lot of time for Q&A at the end. And Q&A really about anything. If you guys have questions about work in Des Moines, anything about the protests, photography, that kind of stuff. I don't want to limit just to this topic. If you guys have any questions at all, you can ask me about it. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, does that look good, Sherry?
It does.
Okay. So this was a shot I took a little bit behind the photo. This was at a rally at the Des Moines Capitol, listening to a couple speakers. And one thing I wanted to do was try to get Des Moines in the skyline. And I know that like the Des Moines protests were pretty big, but it was really nothing compared to some of the photography I saw in bigger cities, whether it was, Minnesota or New York City or California. Because I follow a lot of photojournalist photographers from all over. But one thing I enjoyed was, regardless of where we were all trying to share the same message with what we were doing. Um, so.
Please separate yourself from us. We are here for peaceful demonstration.
We are not a vengeful people. We are a people. It's not just about what are you doing in your personal lives to bring about this is our life, people. What's his name, George? What's his name, George? What's his name, George?
Martin Luther King and Malcolm X demonstrated that. If y'all keep running for us, all right, speaking. And now, they both dead, though. They both dead. They're not here, but guess what? They're in you. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King is in you. And everyone here. They started to work together. They started building in each other. We had everyone from little children to older adults. And we had a woman who said to me, how long will you be here? I want to go with my grandma so that she can be a part of history. That's what's happening today and what happened for the last couple of days. We made history.
Okay, so I will say firstly, that was not my video, just one from somebody that I follow. But it just kind of puts into perspective that photography and videography are powerful. Um, First time I saw that, I just had a bunch of goosebumps, and I just love the fact that how much emotion video can bring to life, especially in a world that is such a social media and online world. Um, so this is a quote I really like. It says, "Discover what your unique abilities are and offer them to the world in the best way you can." Um, this really hits home with me because I've understood that taking photography and video and photos is what I'm best at. Um, so it's the easiest way for me to spread the message that I want to share. And it's not necessarily that way for everybody. This guy down here in the front holding the speaker is a good friend of mine called Billy Weathers here in Des Moines. He's a huge activist and does a lot for the community. And he was a huge leader and role model in these protests. And that's what he's best at, is getting people together and being a leader. And so that was kind of why he organized and led most of these protests and marches. And so I kind of realized that in my friend group, it was kind of my role to document it all. And some people may be writers, so if that's like your ability, spread your message in writing. Um, Talking, public speaking, you're never gonna probably find me at a protest or a march with a microphone in my hand because that's not really my strong suit. So in times like these, I urge people to find out what their strong suit is and then pursue ways to help in that field. These were two photos I took on the march to Terrace Hill. And that was a pretty special night because this riot group, there was another one up on the hill actually, and we got them to drop their riot shields and take a knee with us in a couple moments of silence. And I think just to see that um, those two sides come together was huge. So the why, why is it so important to photograph and capture these moments? I think a lot nowadays, photography is a lot of look at me and kind of like look at what I have, look at where I'm going, especially with social media. But this was not really about that. This was meant to capture moments in time that are important and mean something. This records history. It moves people. It's storytelling. It's humanity. And it's those moments that we want to freeze and not let people forget. Because sometimes if those aren't there, then they're just forgotten about, until the next instance happens. Um, so that was kind of the role I took with it. Not really like a civil duty, but kind of like civil duty, Me being a photographer, I felt like it was on me to capture those moments and to share them. And then you want to be impactful. You want to listen to people and let their voices be heard and messages be captured in this avenue. This photo I thought was super strong because it's a younger girl in front, and she has her whole life ahead of her. And, we're doing these protests and these marches for her and for the future as well. And so I thought this was a super powerful photo. So a big important thing when you're out taking photos is to know what your rights are and have those memorized, because there are good possibilities that conflict may arise, and you're going to be put in scenarios where you may be questioned. So I think it's important that you want to get this memorized so you're not hesitant and you can stand up for yourself. So a little bit about what your rights are. This is a video that I watched just in preparation before I went out. So I will play that as well.
No matter who you are, you have the First Amendment right to peacefully assemble and protest in public spaces, and photograph and videotape the police or anything else in a public space. Here's the deal. Public spaces include streets, sidewalks, and public parks. Private property owners can set rules for public entry, like a theater saying no cell phones. The right to take photos does not give you the right to go places you're not otherwise allowed, record audio of other people's private conversations, trespass, or interfere with police engaged in legitimate law enforcement operations. Police officers may not confiscate or demand to view your digital photos or videos without a warrant, or delete your photos or videos under any circumstances. If you're stopped or detained for taking photos, be polite. Don't resist. Ask, am I free to go? If the officer says no, you are being detained. And if you are detained, ask what crime you're suspected of committing. Until you ask to leave, being stopped is considered voluntary. Remind the officer that taking photographs is your First Amendment right and does not constitute reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. If you believe any right listed here has been violated, contact your local ACLU. Know your rights.
So one thing that I found out when photographing is that usually during the day things are peaceful, but there is that crowd at night that goes out and likes to riot and destroy things. And a lot of those nights I did stay out just to capture it. And these three photos on the right are ones I took probably during the worst night in Des Moines, when a lot of windows got smashed, and a lot of like riot charges, things like that. So a couple things that I learned, you want to bring a mask that is good filtered for when there is tear gas, because if you're up in, the front of it, the front row, which you should be to get good photos, most of the time the best photos are going to be probably in the most dangerous spots. So you want to have that mask to help eliminate any tear gas that you may come across. Same with goggles or safety glasses, not like swimming goggles, but more of like safety glasses or things like that to help protect your eyes as well. And the skate helmet, I did not wear a skate helmet, but once I got out there, I saw someone that had one on, and when he was not wearing it, just strapped it onto his backpack, which I thought was pretty smart, because things will be thrown too. And even if they're not necessarily thrown at you, things can fly through the air and hit you. So it is good to protect your head. A small first aid kit is good, with Band-Aids and spray. There are people out there that are kind of on first aid duty. I saw a lot of people carrying jugs of milk, things like that, and they're there to help people who get burns or tear gas. So those are good resources to look out for as well. Snacks and water. This is kind of a weird one, but you never really know where the night's going to go. So, being a photographer, you kind of need to ride it out until it starts to really die down. And that may be 2 hours, that may be 7 hours. So, to have a water bottle, and whether it's like granola bar, chips, things like that, because you're going to be running around a lot, you're going to be moving quickly, and you don't want to get dehydrated while you're doing that. One thing I found helpful is a longer focal length lens. So I had two lenses with me, and one of them, a 70 to 200 is a really good lens to have, just to be able to get closer shots if in those times where you're not allowed to be close. And then of course, a wide angle lens if you want to capture the entire scene. But as you get pushed back further, you don't want that to eliminate your chances or your options for photos. So I recommended a longer focal length lens. And then dark clothes I found to help, and long sleeves. So I wore darker jeans and then just a black hoodie because you kind of blend in more. A lot of times you want to be a fly on the wall, and bright shirts, striped patterns, that kind of stuff stands out, and you get better photos when people aren't noticing you. Some other tips I would add is just, if you feel like you need to get out of there, there is a time where you should, because being a photographer is not really an excuse to be anywhere or do anything that you want to do. I think I saw a lot of people that thought that, and sometimes when the cops are angry or stressed, they really don't care if you're taking photos, because to them, you're just another person in the way. So that was kind of my experience in Des Moines. It wasn't really too crazy. I think I was uh, I was running around enough that I never got stuck anywhere where I shouldn't have been. But if I did, I think it was helpful to know my rights and be as prepared as possible for that scenario. And the biggest thing is just to tell your story and bring that alive through visuals and photos, and share them and let other people see them and hear it, because it is important and it is meaningful and powerful. And that's really all I had prepared, Sherry. I knew it was going to be a little bit shorter, but if anyone has any questions about my experience or anything, I would love to answer them.
No, that's fine. I mean, the images that you have, I think, are really impactful. I love the one with the little girl as well. I think that one says a lot. And I do like the black and white photography that you did, because I think that has a lot more impact as well.
Yeah, most of my photos I ended up turning to black and white, just because I think black and white is more of a photo journalist feel to it, and it kind of helps make them more timeless, which, protests have been around for so long that a lot of the old photos of protests through the years are also in black and white. So for me, I felt like it just kind of did the style more justice. And my girlfriend actually shot a lot on film photography,
Okay.
which is, I think, a really cool style for this. It's a little bit harder because you kind of need to know what you're doing, and You know, you can't take a photo and look at it and see how it looks. You got to wait till you develop it all. Um, but film photography is also very cool um, for protests and march and things like that. So,
Absolutely. So we have a question that has come in. Why is protest photography so important to you?
for me, I think it was because I wanted to show support for my city. And photography was kind of the best way I thought I could do that. Um, especially with some of my friends that were speaking or leading the marches, I wanted to show support to them as best as I could. So being there and being a number and, you know, being involved with the marches and then also capturing those moments and sharing them. Because I think as the marches went on, more people came out too. Um, and I think photographs can help do that. You know, people don't want to go out at first. It's different. It's a little bit out of their comfort zone to be involved. But once they see unity and that, hey, a lot of people are here supporting this, I want to be involved now. Um, I think that can be huge, especially with social media nowadays, and especially in Des Moines, because Des Moines is very small compared to other cities. A lot of people know a lot of people in Des Moines, you know,
Right.
like there's a lot of connections. So it's with that being a little bit tighter niche community, it's definitely more impactful.
So when you were out, and you said sometimes you were out at, at night, kind of seeing where things went, did you ever feel unsafe around the protesters or the cops or both? Was there ever a time where you had that gut feeling, that need to leave, like you mentioned earlier?
Um, I don't know if I ever felt totally unsafe. It's a weird feeling. It's like a very not exciting, but like a butterflies feeling where your adrenaline is definitely going. Um, you're more alert. You're like constantly looking around. I never really felt unsafe with protesters. There was a few nights where like that tear gas did come flying by, which is kind of new to me because like I've never had that experience before. Um, so that was kind of different. But I'm also like fast running wise. Uh, so I always felt like if I was ever in a place where I felt unsafe, I could get away quickly. And I know there was enough people around me too that I wasn't the only one there. There was one time where somehow I ended up on the other side of the riot line. So I was kind of like behind the cops and walking back, trying to get back around. I think I caught a few of them off guard with just being someone behind them. Um, so they were a little jumpy at that and were very quick to question me. But once I kind of just remained calm and was just like, hey, I was just taking photos. I just want to get back to the other side, you know? Um, they were understanding in my scenario. But I know that's not the case with everybody. So, it's still important to just be alert and know your rights.
Were the BLM protests in Des Moines the first protests that you've documented?
Yes, that was the first protest that I've documented.
How did you get the shot with the little girl?
So that shot was actually a friend of mine in Minneapolis. And that was one thing about photographers is you start to know other photographers in cities. So just being able to share photos amongst each other um, is also, I think, a very powerful tool. Um, and some of those bigger city shots really put it into perspective, I think, of, I don't want to say peaceful in Des Moines, but how peaceful Des Moines remain compared to some of those cities, um, especially New York. And I was hesitant to put more photos in the keynote that weren't mine. That was the only shot that I put that wasn't mine. Um, just because I know me being the speaker, it's supposed to be about my work.
Right.
But there are a lot of other great photographers out there that I saw, people standing on top of burning cars and masks, like the anonymous masks, shots like that were definitely huge in other cities.
So when you're taking pictures at protests, especially since so many different things are going on during the protest, it kind of opens up almost like a gray area. So there were a lot of issues last summer with protesters who were photographed and then they were later arrested for their role in what was going on. How does that impact you, and how can you ensure that protesters know their rights?
Um, so you're saying like photographers would take photos of protesters and then those protesters would get in trouble?
Correct. They were
Um,
identified later through social media or whatever.
yeah, I would say if they're in the act of like committing a crime, whether it's like smashing something, you could go through the effort to blur their faces to help their identity, just to make sure they don't get in trouble. Because my goal is not to get anyone in trouble. Um, but if they're not committing a crime and they later got arrested, I'm not sure if I feel like necessarily that would be on me, just because I think that happened to a lot of people. And being a protester, normally I think you should take the time to know your rights and to state them if you ever get in that situation. And there were a lot of people that still got arrested. Um, and I think one thing about Des Moines that was nice was in that tight community, uh, sharing those stories online and then starting whether it was like a bail fund to go get people out or a petition to sign, things like that. I think that was a little bit easier to do here because I know there was a couple kids that got locked up and money was raised, to help them, to get them out, to spread their message as to what's going on. Um, I don't know if that answered the question or not.
I think so. So when you're getting your pictures out there, what social media do you use or do you suggest? I know I've seen pictures on Facebook. I know some people use Instagram, some people use Twitter. What's your preference?
My preference is Instagram, just with stories, because I know that the Des Moines Black Lives Matter movement, their Instagram page was had a lot of traction and traffic during that time. So that was kind of like the main hub that people were going to. And, my photos weren't just for me, they were for anybody that wanted to use them. I think Twitter is another big one. I don't know if I would do Facebook. I'm not really on Facebook much. Usually I just keep Facebook for like my family stuff. But as far as social movements, I would say Instagram and Twitter are definitely the biggest ones.
Okay. This is more of a general question, not so much about the protests themselves, but what is your advice for somebody who is looking to get into photography?
My advice would be first get a camera. and then get one lens. Don't get 3 or 4 lenses, because I have found when you only have one, what's the best way to say this? Since I only have one lens, I'm not questioning all the time, oh, would my shot have been better with this one, you know? Um, Besides the longer focal length one at night when I got kind of pushed back. But if you're wanting to get into it, get one lens, focus on working with that, shoot manual from the start, just forget automatic, start in manual and work at it until you get good at it. And then YouTube, I think, is the biggest tool. I think you can learn anything you want on YouTube nowadays. So watch YouTube. If you have questions, look them up on YouTube, and then just practice. You know, don't get upset if they're not turning out how you want them to, because eventually they will.
How many shots do you normally take on average before you get the perfect shot?
So I can relate this back to the protest. I shot a lot during the protest, I think. Especially in high frantic moments, I would put it to more of a burst mode, to where I'm just kind of like firing, because with a lot of movement, sometimes it can be hard to get that perfect shot. But if I'm taking, 10 to 15 photos every second, there's a better chance that I will get it. I think shooting film is a little bit different, because you take into account more composition and like what your frame looks like, because you can't take as many photos, and it's more expensive, and you only get 35 photos per roll. So that can also be a good way to start on shooting film, because I think you really take into account those details more versus shooting digital. But protests, run and gun, nighttime, digital is definitely easier to do.
Right.
Most photos in the night, I would probably come home with 400 to 500 shots.
Okay.
But I also had a pretty good idea while taking them which ones I thought were best. So it was a lot easier to go back through and scan, through them. It wouldn't take me 2 hours to look through them all. It would only take, 10 to 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
another thing you can do is make sure you bring extra batteries and extra SD card, because you don't want to be in a scenario where your SD card fails, or for some reason it's not working, or it broke, and you're like, well, I can't take photos now. I think it's important to have that backup on you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I don't do photos at protests and that, but I know that when I am out taking pictures, I might take 200 pictures just so that I can go through them later and figure out which one, has just that right lighting or angle or whatever. And that's the great thing about digital, is you aren't nearly as limited. And
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
somebody I started out on film.
Yeah, that's definitely an advantage of digital. And then especially if you're not impatient about that, going through and looking at them, it can definitely be helpful.
Absolutely. So would you encourage, because sadly, we know that, the things aren't going to just automatically calm down. There are still so many issues that people are feeling the need to take to the streets over, to get out there and raise their voice and all of that. So the protests are continuing. Would you encourage people to go out and just document?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people want to advocate for change and will post about it, yet they don't really do anything besides that. So I think it's important to get out there and actually stand for what you believe in. And, if photography is something you do, then for sure document it. And one thing that helped me, like if I ever got put in a scenario where I was uncomfortable or not really scared, but kind of like that scary atmosphere, to just remember that I'm protesting for people that are scared every time they get pulled over, you know? And that's nothing compared to where I'm at right now. So definitely get out there, know what you're supporting, and have a voice. I think that's super important to do. And to not, you know, a lot of my family members, my parents specifically, didn't really agree with people that were protesting or marching. And I think it's important not to care about that. You know, be your own person and stand up for what you believe in.
Are there any more questions for Mike? I think this has been great. I know I look forward to seeing any other work that you do. I know I already follow you on Instagram, of course. So I do get to see a lot of your work as it is. In the absence of any other questions, we're almost at time anyway. Oh, I'm sorry. I just did get one that came in. Is there a city you would like to shoot in?
My favorite city is New York City. Just because street photography is one of my favorite things, and the life and, you know, the buildings and the people you meet out there are just unlike any other city. You know, there's a surprise around every corner. So I definitely love going to New York City to do photography. And if you're looking to get better at photography, go to New York City. Just get an Airbnb for a weekend, have no agenda besides walking around and taking photos of what you see. And sometimes I wish I was in a bigger city to document the protests, but then again, you know, Des Moines is my city, and it's very important to me. So I was still happy that I was here.
All right. How can people follow you and your work?
I would follow my Instagram page. That's really the only place I post things. I know TikTok is huge right now, but like I've never downloaded TikTok and all these other things that people are saying, you know, you need to get to keep up with the times. I just really like the image platform of Instagram, so that's kind of where I put all my work. So I'd follow that. Let me see what my handle is. I think it's just my name.
Yeah, I just grabbed it and threw it into the chat for people.
Okay. Yeah, I do a lot of mixed things. I do a lot of city shots. Every now and then I do like some weird Photoshop thing. And I just like taking photos. So
Your work definitely shows it.
well, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, for talking to us about this. You know, thank you for going out and documenting.
Yeah, of
I know
course.
you did it for you and for what was going on, but I think it really helps that everybody is able to see not just, you know, what some of the official pictures are, but seeing from the perspective of somebody who was there.
Yeah, definitely. And I encourage everyone to do the same. So
Well, thank you. I will say if anybody does come up with, you know, think of questions after this, feel free to send those my way and I can certainly still pass those on. But otherwise, I think we will go ahead and close for today. So again, thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing everything. And I look
course.
forward to seeing the rest of your work.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See ya.